Let's get started. So, welcome. I am so excited to share this space with you and to hear about your expertise. I was getting to know you and I was just so moved about your diverse background. I mean, you've served as a lawyer, you've served as a financier, a philanthropist, a writer, an advisor to public figures like Bill Gates. And you introduced the concept of a feminine foreign policy at the trade negotiations for the North American Free Trade Agreement that was later adopted by countries across the world. I mean, I was super impressed when I was learning about you. Can you share a little bit more about your journey as you've done all these amazing things as a woman lawyer and how you've participated in these significant contributions in the legal field?
You are very gracious. I must say, when you live the life like mine, a lot of social activists who see law as a tool to do good in the world. One of the things that you realize is when you're doing stuff when you're younger and as you get older, people don't appreciate what you're doing. So even at the NAFTA negotiating table, nobody thought my idea for a feminist foreign policy was at all interesting and had any merit whatsoever. Now, of course, Mexico's embraced it, Sweden's embraced it. It's considered really a very progressive, positive thing. Most countries are really getting around it, and that's been great. But you don't get immediate satisfaction. When I brought the first sexual harassment case that defined sexual harassment in terms of law, go back to 1978, a long time ago. People at that time said, sexual harassment, what? What is that? We don't know that. And so we made it a feature that people use that term. It became part of law. But when we filed the first case at Yale when I was an undergraduate there, people were not so thrilled. I mean, it was a time at Yale that was really different. They couldn't see that a feminist activist was anything but you had to be pretty stupid, you had to be pretty ugly, and you had to be pretty lesbian. It didn't add up to them that you could actually be a normal person and just say, in terms of morality, it really should be a fair deal that women have a shot at an equal education as men do. They've just taken in the States women into a lot of the main big colleges at the Ivy League level. But I went to Yale, it was still very new to have women. And then it still was a place where the head of the school of Yale said, our mission is to educate 1,000 male leaders every year. What about those 200 women you've just taken? There was no understanding what those women could do. And of course, it was at a time when birth control had first become legalized in 1968 with the Griswold v. Connecticut case. And that was only for married couples in the United States, birth control. And then abortion in 1972 and 73 with Roe v. Wade. So it was a different time then. Sex was, widely available. We didn't really have the age crisis yet. AIDS was coming. That hadn't hit. And women had gotten into these institutions, and many of us felt, well, now we're equal. Now we are equal to men. It's going to change. And of course, that was very naive. What I realized is that the door had been opened and we walked through it to go to American universities of high standing, but then we were left. There was no real equality thereafter. That didn't happen. And still, that's the case. It's not a meritocracy, this world. Whereas my generation of women thought, you get in the door, you work really, really hard, give it your best, and you'll have a fair shot. It doesn't work that way. Still doesn't work that way. A little bit more so, we hope. There are now more women through, but still, the problems of discrimination are huge. When I went to Yale, I mean, certainly I remember attending a conference at Wesleyan University with Gloria Steinem, and the question came up about rape. And I asked the question, how many of you in this room of roughly maybe 1,000, mostly women, but some men, had been raped? Nobody raised their hand. And then I said, okay, hold on a second. What about date raped, which is how that term came about? I started using it. And then Susan Brown Miller heard that and started using it herself and wrote about it in her book, and a beautiful book that she wrote. But when I said how many have been date raped, almost every hand in the room went up. And that was 1974-ish. So people could relate to that. And date rape was not a rape, really. It was a bad date. Didn't work out. I wasn't happy. Things were very different back then. When we filed a sexual harassment lawsuit, it was a newly constructed legal theory. We went forward with it. We all got mooted out of the suit because Yale took a long time. So we graduated. And so as they delayed everything, then, we graduated. So the court said we didn't have standing to bring the suit except for one lone Black woman. And she ultimately lost. They couldn't believe that she'd been sexually propositioned by a white guy. It just wasn't the days when those suits were going to win. But certainly, I know her very well, and I have no doubt in my mind that what she claimed was absolutely true, that she had been sexually propositioned by Raymond Duvall, who's never had to be held to account. He's teaching in Minnesota still. He's on that faculty, and he's never been held to account. But we brought that case, and I've got all sorts of I've got feces in the post for being a plaintiff in the case. I got all sorts of murder threats, stuff. I was going to be defiled and harmed, all sorts of threats. Yale, the head of public relations at Yale, said that I was a lesbian, which I'm not. I think it's a great thing. Another life I might be, but nonetheless, I wasn't. And they didn't mean it as a compliment. That was not a kind word. They said I was flunking out of Yale. I wasn't. I was the top of the class. I won a Marshall Scholarship, a Rhodes Scholarship, got into Yale and Harvard law schools, which were not minor accomplishments. But Yale was really quite mean about it. It was a whole awakening for me that the world was going to be very tough, that the establishment, I couldn't believe that, every Yale man has got a mother at least, and most have sisters and aunts, and, they date women. Wouldn't they want equal opportunity for those people? Wouldn't they want them protected from rape? But no, they defended the, alleged rapist that we brought to trial. Yale took that view. They couldn't understand it. All we wanted at the time was, of course, a grievance procedure, just so you could register that you've been sexually assaulted. And because Yale is very, it's got, it's not like one monolithic institution. People live in different places at Yale with different colleges, and if you're at the medical school or the law school, so we wanted a university-wide system. So if you registered a complaint, somebody who might have been your sexual predator when you were at one of the colleges, maybe was also operating on that basis at the med school and at the law school. So we wanted a worldwide acknowledgement that if there were sexual predators, they could be identified. Yale ultimately gave that. And of course, now every institution in the world pretty much does that, educational institutions. But at the time, it was considered radical. It wasn't necessary. Jose Cabranes, who is married to a Yale law professor who I have a great deal of respect for, Kate Stith. And at the time, though, he was working for Yale's inside general counsel office. And, he said it was all, it had no basis in fact whatsoever. He's never apologized for that. And he's now a very esteemed judge on the Second Circuit bench in New Haven. So it's not, if you choose to try to bring about social reform by using the law, you don't ordinarily get a lot of praise. We stay the course. I mean, now, for instance, at Yale, I'm considered one of the great, heroes at Yale. The law school applauds me. I win these awards at Yale. I never petitioned for them. They come because we've been able to change the world by listening to our hearts, doing what we think is right, and arguing for these things in ways that are respectful, but using the legal system. So I encourage others to do the same if there are things you really care about. Law is a magnificent tool and can be utilized both in Britain and in the States and all around the world to do good.
Dr. Ann, you mentioned staying the course. And as you're telling your story, I noticed that, when you are introducing these concepts, they're not very well received. And there's almost like this uphill battle, especially in the very beginning when you are opening the door to women's rights and equality. What other kind of key qualities and skills, because that does take patience and that does take a lot of focus and a lot of resiliency as well in order to continue doing the work that you're doing, which is super significant, not just for women, but for everyone. What other key qualities and skills would you say that has helped you to contribute to your success and to your recognition as a woman lawyer doing these such important works?
All right. So I'm going to be somewhat controversial here. You need a sense of humor, absolutely, because if you're too big on yourself, forget it. Nobody likes anybody they're really full of themselves, and we don't need the female version of a mansplainer, out there. So you need to have humility and a sense of humor. But the other thing is a belief structure. I developed a business on the back of the fact that I believe that you can do an awful lot of good, represent the kind of clients you want, and you can still make a lot of money. And I think, certainly in law, people sell themselves off for money. They take on clients and say, well, I need to have money. We've had opportunities, for instance, where we're up against some of the best lawyers in the field. And although we've been up against the really best and brightest lawyers that and there are lots of them, I've never been up a lawyer who's better than our team. And I take pride in that. So we don't sell ourselves. We're just not available to anyone. When Harvey Weinstein called me and said, "Hey, Annie," and I said, "Sir, I don't know you." Annie said, "Call me Harvey." I said, "No, Mr. Weinstein, I don't know you. I'd like you to represent me." I said, "On what issues?" And we explained it was a female issue. I said, "Please stop. I don't want to know any of the facts. I don't want to be conflicted out because I hope to be working against you. That's the kind of work I do." He offered millions of dollars. They would pay me so I wouldn't at all get involved with him. And I said, "No, thank you. I have no interest. I want to make my own money. It's always nice to have a couple of million that I can call my own, but I'm not doing that. That's not how I'm living my life." And I wouldn't represent him. Now, other, people have done that. Other people I love, Lisa Bloom, who is a fabulous attorney, Mother Gloria Allred. They've done a lot of good for women, but Lisa went and represented Harvey Weinstein. We don't do that, and I won't do that. And I think that you can make really good money. I mean, you can really make a very fine business by doing important work, and by being on the right side of the politics and not having to sell yourself off the likes of these sexual predators. We didn't do any work for Jeff Epstein. We don't do work for any of these people. Prince Andrew, when we're approached, we find out who are the, the client, and are they the kinds of people that we want to represent. We think on women's issues, particularly, we need to give them our best talents because it's very hard for women to win any kind of an assault case, a rape case. The convictions are very low, and civilly, we need to be able to come forward, speak truth to justice, represent these vulnerable people. And I think by doing that, you can change how the world works a bit, and you can also do really well. And so I think making money and doing well go together, and we've been really able to prove that.
I love that. Absolutely. That you can absolutely make money and do good at the same time. That's a concept that is almost still foreign in business and especially in the law as well. So thank you for that, Dr. Ann. I want to ask you one more question. In your view, there have been some key opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for women in the law, especially with your background and you really being in the trenches of pushing the needle forward for women. What do you think, in your opinion, are things that we can do to work collectively towards a more inclusive and equitable legal profession that acknowledges women, acknowledges their efforts, and also protects them and propels them forward as well?
One of the things I did was to start my own business. It was a way of, I worked for Sherman and Sterling. I ran their corporate department out of Washington. Those are the days when Sherman and Sterling would brag that it was the best corporate law firm in the world. And it really it believed that, it really believed that stuff. So I worked with them and started off there. I then went to Goldman Sachs, and they really considered themselves the best M&A, mergers and acquisitions department on Wall Street. And okay, so I was blessed with having those opportunities and getting that training, which made me realize that, okay, I can be as good as anybody on the street. I know what I'm about. So I think you have to get really good training. You got to be in places where you got to get good training. That's going to go somewhat against the ethos of a lot of firms now that allow for a lot of remote working. Because if you're working remotely most of the time, you're never going to get trained properly. You're not going to live in a community where people really affirm you and you learn how to be really great. So I think there's some problems there. And all the law firms are facing this issue. There's no question about it. We have our lawyers come in 3 days a week. Absolutely. We have a lot of people working remotely, though, that we hire, but we try to keep that spirit together. So those are challenges. And I think also the way that we work, that you need to have maternity and paternity leave because you see the same problems. Women get educated, they come in, they're really good, and then they have kids. And I think that's something that, when I came, I had 3 kids. I never had a maternity leave once. I was back at the office pretty instantly. It was considered a natural part of life. Like Black women in the plantation fields, they give birth in the field and they continue working. That was really the belief structure. My generation, if I took any time off for having a kid, I thought I'd lose my job. I would not get the respect I'd worked so hard for. So I took no time off, no sick days. I was there all the time. All the time. We worked on weekends. At Sherman and Sterling, I had to bill 2,700 hours a year, and I did. And that means you're working 6 days a week, 11, 12 hours a day. I mean, that's where you are. You really gave it your best. Now, I'm not, militating for that. In our law firm here, we ask people to work 1,800 hours a year. It's a really different situation. We don't want people to be torn apart. We want them to have it all and to make that kind of a life. But it's really hard when you have kids or you have elder care responsibilities. You have other responsibilities in life. So how do you blend that? And I think people have got to give good opportunities to the men as well as to the women, because in society, if women are still carrying all the responsibilities for childcare or most of them, it doesn't work. She's never going to have a real shot at being considered a great or a powerhouse. It's just not enough time in life to do that. You've got to be in the game. So we have to figure out ways where we're honoring the men and the women, the parents, or whoever our structures maintain family structures. They have to work, whether it's same sex, trans sex, whatever one is living, whatever their lifestyle is, multiple creatures in a family structure, sometimes two or three people in one family structure, all adults living together. All that we have to honor and give time off and allow for them to have children, to take care of their elderly, to take care of long-term illnesses, while also being really good and the best in their profession. We have to work on that. And I think also things like sexual assault, this is a very common phenomenon. Most women I know have been sexually assaulted. It's an epidemic, and it's really important that we have policies so that, for instance, if somebody's on assignment for us abroad, they're sexually assaulted, we'll pay for them to see a therapist, a doctor, to have the abortion if it's necessary, to take care of the venereal disease if it's necessary. We'll deal with all of that stuff. We think it's important that we offer that kind of support system. We need to do that. So it's not just parental leave policies, depending on how your family is constituted, whether you've got one husband, three husbands, no husbands, whatever. We try to be there in ways that are supportive, and and I think that's the same with sexual assault and all those issues of human life that come up that don't get addressed so much. And in the States, people are avoiding because they're very, very awkward with what's happened now with the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court level and the lack of abortion facilities to 36 million women right now in the United States. That has to be addressed. So we've got to be active. I think those are the issues, getting the personal life, in a situation, not balanced, but so you can have a full personal life and a full professional life. You've got to give both. And right now, people go off on maternity leaves for a year. It's really hard to come back. If you want to do that, okay. But we have to figure out ways that men are also at home too, taking care of those kids on the same basis the women are, or we're never going to have sexual equality. It's so fundamental, taking care of those care provisions.
Absolutely, Dr. Ann. I have to agree. It's a systemic type of shift that would allow women to really step up and have that equality if we were able to have some of that help in the more personal side, creating the family, creating the you said not a work-life balance, but more like of an inclusion, almost like an inclusion in both sides, both areas of our life. And I absolutely would agree with you. I'm looking forward to seeing how is it that we're going to be shifting in that direction. And with women like you really advocating for other women, I'm really hopeful to see what it is that's going to happen in the future for all of us. Dr. Ann, thank you so very much for all of your work and for sharing your expertise with us as well with the Women in the Law. I am just so happy to get to know you and spend this time with you and to hear from you and your experience as well. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for the interview and for your time. You're so gracious. Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise, talk to you soon.
Good. Look forward to it. Thank you.